The Cold War was a competition being waged between the superpowers on a global scale. However, after more than 7 years of bringing you videos, that is abundantly clear to you. Like in any competition, all sides looked to gain any advantage they could over the other, either through straightforward means, but also using underhanded or hidden methods if needed. Covert actions, espionage if you will. Spying was a strong feature of the Cold War, as any fan of books or movies could attest. And the best part of many of those films and books? Well, it's the spy gadgets, of course. I'm your host David, and today we are going to look at some of the real spy tools that were developed, or at least proposed, in pursuit of winning the Cold War. I'm willing to bet that for most of us, when somebody mentions spy gadgets, most of us think of Q, the quartermaster from James Bond. He's the eccentric gadget master who hands 007 exploding pens, invisible cars, and a briefcase that doubles as a machine gun. And while cinematic license has certainly been taken in those movies, during the Cold War, real intelligence agencies had their own versions of Q branch. The CIA, KGB, MI6, and everybody else really did build lipstick pistols, umbrellas that shot poison darts, hollow coins for microfilm, and even animal spies. Some of these devices worked frighteningly well. Others were, well, frankly absurd, like a cat wired for sound that ended its mission by wandering into traffic. The Cold War was not just an arms race of nuclear missiles and jet fighters, it was also a technological race of imagination. Every agency wanted a gadget that could give their operatives an edge in that shadow war of espionage. And sometimes the results were indistinguishable from those props on a Bond movie set. Now, when you think of a spy, you might picture someone with a silenced Walther PPK under their tuxedo jacket. But Cold War gadgeteers usually aimed for subtler, deadlier designs, weapons hidden in plain sight. Take the KGB's lipstick pistol, nicknamed the Kiss of Death. Discovered at a border checkpoint in West Berlin in 1965, it looked like an ordinary tube of lipstick. Except with a twist of the base, instead of rouge, you'd fire a 4.5mm round into your target. Just one shot, but enough for a close-range assassination. Imagine rummaging through a handbag at customs and missing the fact that the lipstick could literally kill you. And then there's the most infamous spy weapon of them all, the Bulgarian umbrella, which sounds like a wrestling move, or maybe a cocktail of some sort, but I digress. In 1978, Bulgarian dissident Georgy Markov was walking across Waterloo Bridge in London when he felt a sharp prick in his thigh. A man beside him had just prodded him with a seemingly ordinary umbrella. Hidden in the tip of the umbrella, however, was a compressed gas mechanism that fired a tiny pellet laced with ricin poison. Markov died 3 days later, and the umbrella murder became one of the Cold War's most notorious assassinations. The message was chilling. The KGB and its allies could strike anywhere, anytime, with a weapon you wouldn't notice until it was too late. Of course, not all of these weapons were as elegant. Maybe not the right word. In 1954, KGB defector Nikolai Kholhov revealed that the Soviets had built an entire arsenal of disguised arms, cigarette cases that doubled as pistols, and even a triple-barreled electric gun that fired cyanide-laced bullets with a sound no louder than the snap of a finger. Quiet, deadly, and terrifyingly inventive. And before you think that the KGB were alone in developing ingenious, hidden ways to kill people, across the Atlantic, the CIA was experimenting as well. In the 1970s, a Senate hearing revealed one of their more exotic devices, a dart gun that fired tiny frozen poison darts loaded with shellfish toxin. The dart would dissolve in the body, leaving behind a body that looked like it had just suffered a heart attack. The weapon was small, silent, and nearly undetectable. Exactly the kind of thing you'd expect Q to hand Bond before a mission. And these weren't just prototypes, they reflected a real need. Intelligence agencies wanted deniable ways to kill. Guns were too loud, knives were too messy, polonium-laced tea was too niche. But a puff of air from an umbrella, a quick twist of a lipstick tube, those could leave a spy's hands clean and their enemies none the wiser. After all, the Bondian idea of spying is pretty far from what real espionage is like, which is about not attracting attention to yourself in any way. Which makes for a perfect segue. If weapons were the flashy side of spy gadgets, surveillance devices were the bread and butter of espionage. The Cold War was, above all else, a battle for information, and spies needed ways to listen without being noticed. The Soviets had one of the cleverer tricks, the shoe transmitter. It might sound like something straight out of Get Smart, but it was a lot more useful than a shoe phone. An American diplomat stationed in Romania once had his shoes sent for repair. When they were returned, everything looked normal, except, unbeknownst to him, the heel now contained a tiny radio transmitter and microphone. With the pull of a hidden pin, the device activated, and the unsuspecting diplomat became Gregor Samsa, a walking bug, broadcasting every conversation to a police van parked nearby. The CIA, never one to be outdone, pushed the limits of imagination with the Insectothopter. Picture a robotic dragonfly about 6 centimeters long, powered by a tiny gas engine that flapped its wings. The idea was simple: an insect-sized drone that could carry a microphone into places humans couldn't reach, at least without being noticed. Tests showed it could fly about 200 meters in under a minute. So why didn't this work out? Well, even the lightest crosswind blew it hopelessly off course. It was never deployed, but the idea was decades ahead of its time, the great-grandparent of today's drone surveillance. More practical, though less glamorous, were cameras. The German-designed Minox subminiature camera became the standard-issue spy tool of the era. Just 10 centimeters long, it fit easily in the palm of a hand and could take surprisingly sharp photos of documents or blueprints or other items up close. CIA officers, MI6 agents, and KGB operatives all used Minox cameras at one point or another. Meanwhile, agencies also built cameras into cigarette packs, pens, shirt buttons, even tie knots. East Germany's Stasi famously had a necktie camera for undercover work. These devices proved that in the Cold War, anything could become a listening or recording device. Shoes, cats, dragonflies, even your colleague's tie, all potential spies. Now, for a spy, being caught was the worst case scenario. So, agencies equipped their operatives with gadgets designed for escape, concealment, and sometimes even suicide. One of the cleverest tricks in this was the hollow coin. At first glance, it looked like a regular nickel or ruble coin, but insert a pin into a tiny hole and it popped open, revealing space for microfilm or coded messages. In 1953, a hollow US nickel accidentally broke open when a paperboy dropped it. Inside was a microfilm cipher that eventually led to the capture of Soviet spy Rudolf Abel. Not all concealment devices were so subtle. The CIA issued sub-operatives with suicide glasses. Hidden in the hollow arm of the glasses was a tiny cyanide capsule. If captured, an agent could chomp open the arm of the glasses and swallow the pill. They would thus die within seconds, avoiding torture or interrogation. Grim, but very real. Even more bizarre was the CIA rectal toolkit. Yep, you heard that right. Agents were issued pill-shaped capsules, smooth and durable enough to be concealed in the rectum, containing saws, lockpicks, and other tools for breaking out of captivity. It sounds absurd, but for an agent facing imprisonment in hostile territory, it could mean the difference between life and death. Other tools were less invasive, but just as inventive. The dead drop spike looked like an ordinary metal rod and was intended to be used as part of a dead drop. A spy could push it into the ground, a tree stump, or a wall, hiding messages or microfilm inside for another agent to retrieve at a later date. There were also hollow bolts, fake rocks, and even chewing gum wrappers designed to hold microdots. These allowed spies to exchange information without ever meeting face to face. As technology advanced, spy agencies embraced electronics and miniaturization, and sometimes they built gadgets that were more science fiction than science fact. The most famous example was the Thing. In 1945, Soviet children presented the US ambassador in Moscow with a carved wooden Great Seal of the United States. It hung in the ambassador's office for 7 years. What no one knew was that hidden inside was a passive listening device designed by Leon Theremin. Yes, the same Theremin who invented the eerie electronic instrument. The device had no power source, no wires. It remained dormant until a Soviet operator outside beamed a radio signal at it. Then it would vibrate and transmit conversations from the ambassador's office. The US only discovered it by accident in 1952. By then, it had been listening for the better part of a decade. The CIA also worked with the Swiss company Nagra to develop the Nagra SN, a sub-miniature tape recorder about the size of a wallet. Exclusive to the CIA at first, but later also used by law enforcement agencies, it can record high-fidelity audio secretly, perfect for bugging meetings or capturing conversations. The Soviets later copied the design, calling it the Yakhta for use by its own spies. Communication was another frontier in the world of espionage. CIA officers used burst transmitters, tiny radios that could send a coded message in a fraction of a second, making it nearly impossible for enemy direction finders to trace the source. Meanwhile, both sides relied on one-time pad ciphers, unbreakable codes often written in microdots or hidden in miniature readers. Of course, as bugs and transmitters proliferated, so did bug detectors. Counterintelligence teams swept rooms with frequency scanners and nonlinear junction detectors, which could detect the semiconductors in hidden devices. After discovering the thing, the US Embassy in Moscow found more than 120 bugs hidden in its walls by the late 1940s. It was an endless game of cat and mouse. For every new listening device, there was a new tool to find it. Of course, the construction of the new US Embassy in Moscow is the ultimate example of hidden transmitters, as the construction project, which started in 1979, largely used listening devices as load-bearing devices since there were so many of them. The building had to be largely taken apart and rebuilt due to the bug infestation. All told, these technological innovations helped push the boundaries of electronics and miniaturization. In many ways, Cold War spy tech laid the groundwork for today's wireless surveillance and counter-surveillance tools. Now, I'm betting that more than a few of you have already heard about the devices and tools we've already mentioned, but there are plenty more which most people have never heard of. Some gadgets seem almost like parody. The US military developed the dog-do transmitter, a rescue beacon disguised as a lump of animal feces. The idea was that no enemy soldier would dare to pick it up. Downed pilots in Vietnam could activate it, and search teams would home in on the signal. Crude, but effective. The CIA also experimented with pigeon cameras. Tiny 35mm cameras were strapped to pigeons' chests. Released near Soviet facilities, the birds would snap photos as they flew overhead, then return to their coops with the film. Details of missions remain classified, but declassified documents confirm the project was real. Rumors from KGB defectors speak of a rectal pistol, a single-shot weapon designed to be concealed inside the body. Whether it was ever issued is unclear, but the very fact it was designed shows how extreme ideas could get. I am unclear from the information available if the weapon was meant to be retrieved before use, or if the user was just supposed to grab their ankles, aim, and hope for the best. When we think of Cold War espionage, it's tempting to picture James Bond, suave, charming, armed with gadgets from Q Branch. But the reality was stranger, deadlier, and often darker. The CIA, KGB, and MI6 really did have lipstick guns, umbrella assassinations, hollow coins, robotic insects, and yes, even rectal toolkits. Some of these gadgets worked flawlessly, others failed spectacularly. But all of them reflect the intensity of the Cold War, a conflict where information was power and where spies needed every advantage they could get. The line between fiction and reality blurred. The gadgets of Q Branch weren't entirely make-believe, they were echoes of real devices, sometimes more fantastic, sometimes more horrifying. In the end, the Cold War's real Q Branch teaches us one thing. In espionage, imagination was just as important as firepower. And more often than not, truth was stranger than anything Ian Fleming could have made up. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss our future work, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and have pressed the bell button, which is in reality the best type of spy, because this entire time you had no idea it was actually passing along secret information to our arch rivals. The best spy, after all, is the one you don't suspect. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com. This is the Cold War Channel, and as we think about the Cold War, please remember that history is shades of gray and rarely black and white.